The wails of sirens and bright flashes of light pierced the darkness outside the gates of Dade Correctional Institution. Inside the prison, a tense silence hung in the air, interrupted only by the dull echo of guards' footsteps along the narrow corridors. The heat was stifling, as if the walls trapped the steam with no escape. Medics rushed a stretcher down the dimly lit hallway, where inmates, pressed against the bars of their cells, watched intently. "We've got a man unconscious in the shower," shouted one of the guards, his voice barely rising above the noise of the water still pouring from behind the heavy metal door. One of the nurses muttered into her radio, "Possible heat stroke, severe dehydration." "But these burns," her voice trembled. Steam rose from the bodies sprawled on the shower floor. Darrell Rainey's face was contorted in agony. His skin was covered in redness and burns as if he'd been boiled alive. Officer Greg Myers, standing off to the side, looked pale, his gaze avoiding the eyes of his colleagues. "Give us some room," one of the medics said quietly, and the guards began to back away. Darren was carefully lifted onto the stretcher just as two detectives entered the room, Marcus Green and his partner, Lisa Thompson. Both were seasoned detectives, but this case immediately felt unusual. "What have we got?" Marcus asked, surveying the shower. Water was still running, creating a strange mix of steam and blood that trickled into the drain. "He's been in there for hours," one of the medics said, raising his hands defensively. "But something's wrong with the water temperature. We can't explain these burns." "Who was in charge of this wing?" Lisa asked, glancing at the guards. One of them, Myers, cleared his throat nervously, avoiding eye contact with the detectives. "We did everything as usual," Myers mumbled quickly. "But the cameras, they weren't working. I mean, they weren't working today." Marcus squinted at the man, sizing him up. Something wasn't right here, and everyone could feel it. The next morning, Marcus and Lisa sat in the office of Warden Thomas Brooks. Brooks, a solid man with a stern expression, stared at the detectives with his arms crossed. His gaze was calm, but Marcus sensed that something more was hiding beneath that calm demeanor. "I'm confident this was an accident," Brooks said, looking away from the report in front of him. Darrell Rainey was unstable. He had schizophrenia, and unfortunately, these incidents happen. "Accidents don't usually leave burns." Lisa shot back, leaning forward. "And the cameras? You're saying they just happened to not work that day?" "Yes, there was a system failure," Brooks replied curtly. "We're addressing the issue." Marcus watched the warden closely. The autopsy report hadn't come in yet, but what they saw at the scene didn't match the usual explanations. Burns, faulty cameras, conflicting statements from the guards, it all smelled like a cover-up. "I want to question the guards on duty that night," Marcus said, rising from his seat. "And we need all footage from the last 48 hours, working cameras or not." Brooks sighed heavily but nodded. Later, in the interrogation room, Marcus and Lisa sat across from Greg Myers, the guard who had been nervous from the start. He rubbed his hands together, avoiding eye contact with the detectives. "Walk us through your shift that evening," Marcus began, leaning in. Myers looked at his hands, then at the door, as if he was about to jump up and flee. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. "We left Rainey in the shower, to calm him down. He started acting up, and then what?" Lisa asked, watching him closely. "I don't know," Myers blurted out quickly. "When I came back, the water was too hot. I don't know who turned it on. It just happened." Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances. Conflicting statements, broken cameras, and Myers clearly holding something back. They knew this was only the beginning. A few days later, detectives Marcus Green and Lisa Thompson sat at their desks in the police station when medical examiner Amanda Price walked into the room. Holding a folder with Darrell Rainey's autopsy report, Marcus immediately noticed the grim expression on her face. "Here's your report," Price said, handing the folder to Marcus. "But I think you'll be disappointed." Lisa frowned, and Marcus, after glancing at the first few pages, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The official cause of death was listed as undetermined. The burns they had seen with their own eyes were not cited as a cause or consequence of death. "How is that possible?" Lisa broke the silence, staring at Price. "We saw the burns. It's obvious." "Yes, I saw them too," Price sighed quietly. "But officially, we can't link them to his death. There were signs of heating on his skin, but not the kind that usually leads to death." The pathological changes could have resulted from a number of factors, that's all I can say. Marcus slammed the folder shut and stood up, feeling frustrated. They had expected at least one clue, but things only got more complicated. The official findings didn't corroborate what they had seen. And this played right into the hands of the prison administration. Can we challenge this conclusion? He asked, trying to find some kind of loophole. You can, but you'll need more evidence, Price shrugged. Look, I'm on your side, but without direct proof, we've got nothing. This doesn't look like intentional murder. At worst, it's negligence. Marcus pondered for a moment. They were at a dead end. No direct evidence linking the burns to the cause of death, the cameras were down, and the guards were seemingly united in their silence. All of this suggested that the case went much deeper than it initially appeared. We're not stopping, he said, turning to Lisa. If anyone thinks this case is just going to be closed, they're sorely mistaken. After Price left, Lisa reopened the folder, scanning the report more thoroughly. There's nothing here that points to intentional homicide, she murmured. But something's definitely wrong. Myers is hiding something, and I'm sure Brooks knows more than he's letting on. We know Rainey was left in the shower for far too long. Marcus said, staring thoughtfully out the window. And this isn't the first time incidents like this have occurred in the prison. I want to talk to the inmates. They might know more than the guards. Bobby Williams could be a good start, Lisa suggested. He was in the wing that day. Maybe he saw something. The next day, they returned to the prison to interview Bobby. The inmate sat at a table in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed, but he appeared calm. His thin face and tense gaze suggested he had been living in fear for a long time. You're here about Rainey, right? Bobby spoke first, not waiting for questions. His voice was raspy and quiet. I knew you'd come. Marcus sat across from him, staring intently at Bobby. What do you know? He asked directly. Bobby nervously jerked his head, glancing around the room as if afraid someone was eavesdropping. This wasn't the first death like this, he whispered, leaning forward. Those who don't comply get sent to the shower. They say it's a way to calm us down. But you've seen how they calm people. Lisa frowned, scribbling down Bobby's words. They use it as punishment? She clarified. Bobby nodded. They call it a cleansing session. Darren wasn't the first, but he couldn't handle it. They left him in there too long. No one thought the water could get that hot. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. Now it all made sense. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate torture. Who's doing this? Marcus asked, staring directly into Bobby's eyes. Bobby looked away. Everyone knows. But no one will say it outright, Bobby said. If you start asking too many questions, you might end up in that same shower yourself. It was a warning. Marcus and Lisa left the room with a heavy feeling. They knew the case was becoming dangerous, but it was too late to turn back. Marcus and Lisa left the interrogation room with a distinct sense of unease. Bobby Williams's words had added chilling details to Darrell Rainey's death, details that now needed to be confirmed. The big problem remained. The guards continued to stay silent. Someone was clearly controlling the situation, and that someone had too much influence inside the prison. Back in the office, Marcus began laying out all the gathered data on the table, trying to piece together the inmates' testimonies, the autopsy report, and the contradictory answers from the guards. Lisa sat across from him, nervously tapping a pen against a folder. We know Myers is hiding something important, she said when the silence became unbearable. He couldn't have missed what was happening in the shower. We need to question him again and make him talk. True, Marcus nodded, glancing at the folder full of the guards' conflicting statements. But we need evidence to apply pressure. If we approach him with just suspicions, it won't lead anywhere. Lisa thought for a moment, recalling the details of Myers' interview. He had been nervous, avoided direct answers, and every time the showers were mentioned, his hands had started shaking. She narrowed her eyes, going over possible options in her head. What if we look for additional footage? She suggested. The warden claims the cameras weren't working, but what are the chances that there aren't other surveillance sources? There must be footage somewhere, maybe even from nearby blocks. Or recordings of conversations between the guards, Marcus added. If we can find anything, it'll break Myers. They decided to put more pressure on the warden, Thomas Brooks, one more time. Visiting his office was always tense, but now Marcus was ready for an open confrontation. When they entered the office, Brooks was sitting behind his large oak desk, calmly looking over some documents. He greeted the detectives with a fake smile that immediately irritated Marcus. "What can I do for you this time?" Brooks asked lazily, setting the papers aside. "We're here about Darrell Rainey again," Marcus began, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need the footage from the nearby cameras. Even if the ones in the shower weren't working, the others should have captured something useful." Brooks's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly composed himself. "I've already told you the cameras weren't functioning properly that day," he said, folding his arms. "Malfunctions happen. You won't find anything useful." Marcus squinted. He had expected this response, but this time he wasn't backing down. "Then perhaps we could look at recordings of the guards' communications?" Lisa added, staring directly at Brooks. "Information flow between prison staff must have been recorded." This time, the expression on Brooks's face noticeably hardened. He paused, and at that moment, the detectives knew their assumption was correct. "Those records are confidential," Brooks responded curtly. "They pertain to the internal security of the facility. You won't get access without a court order." Lisa exchanged a glance with Marcus. This was resistance, but they already knew Brooks was hiding something. Now, it wasn't just about Darrell Rainey, but about an entire system protecting its own. "We won't need a court order if you end up under investigation," Marcus said coldly. "Your behavior in this investigation raises more questions than you realize. If we prove that you're obstructing justice, no one will protect you." Brooks remained silent for several seconds, his jaw clenched tightly. He knew the threat was real but didn't back down. "This is all rumors and speculation," he finally said. "Without hard evidence, you won't get anywhere." Marcus stood up and nodded to Lisa. They knew they couldn't extract what they needed from Brooks right now, but his reaction had confirmed their suspicions. As they exited the office, Lisa stopped in the hallway and looked at Marcus. "He knows something," she said. "And if we keep digging, he's going to fight harder." "We have to find Myers," Marcus replied. "He's the weak link in this chain. If we push him hard enough, he'll crack." They headed to the interrogation room, ready for another round with the guard who had become a key figure in their investigation. Greg Myers sat in the interrogation room, nervously twisting a glass of water in his hands. He looked noticeably worn down. Each visit from the detectives had been putting more pressure on him, and now it was clear, the dark circles under his eyes, his jittery movements, and his trembling hands all betrayed his fraying nerves. He knew they were there for the truth, but the question was how much longer he could hold out. Marcus and Lisa entered the room with determined expressions. Both of them understood that the time for diplomacy was over. Myers was the last link that could break the chain of silence. The detectives exchanged glances, and Marcus spoke first. "Greg, we've been here several times," he began in a calm tone, but there was an underlying threat in his voice. "And every time, you leave something out. Time's running out, and this is your last chance to tell us what really happened." Myers swallowed, trying to appear composed, but his voice betrayed him. "I've told you everything I know," he whispered, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "No, you haven't," Marcus replied, slowly pulling up a chair and sitting directly across from the guard. "You've only told us the part of the story they let you tell. But we both know that's a lie." Lisa watched closely, noting every small change in Myers' behavior. She could see that he was starting to lose control. "We've spoken to the inmates," Marcus continued, leaning forward. "They told us about the cleansing sessions. Do you know what that is? You were there when Rainey was locked in the shower. And now it's time to tell us how it really happened." Myers turned pale. His hands trembled more violently, and he glanced at Lisa as if seeking salvation from her. I didn't want this," he finally managed to say, struggling to swallow. "It got out of hand. They told me it was just a way to calm down the inmates, that it was done all the time. I didn't think you would die." Lisa tensed, listening to every word. Marcus nodded, realizing they were close to uncovering the truth. "Who told you? Who ordered you to leave him in the shower?" Marcus pressed, keeping up the pressure. Myers bit his lip, as if unsure whether to continue. "It was Brooks," he finally blurted out. "The warden. He knew. He always knew. It was his idea, the cleansing sessions. We locked them in the showers to cool off. But the water, it was too hot. I tried to leave, but they made me turn a blind eye to what was happening." Marcus squinted. Brooks's name had come up too early in their investigation. But now they had their first real witness who was ready to talk. "You realize you're now a suspect too?" Lisa asked coldly. "Your silence has already made you an accomplice. If you want to get out of this with minimal consequences, you'll have to tell us everything. Right now." Myers exhaled slowly, realizing there was no turning back. He lowered his head and began speaking in a quiet but resolute voice. "That day started like any other. Rainey started acting up, and Brooks ordered him to be locked in the shower. I knew the water would get hot, but I didn't think it would get that bad. We left him there. When I came back to check, the water was already scalding, and he was unconscious. I tried to turn off the water, but it was too late. When the other guards arrived, they said we'd make it look like an accident. The cameras hadn't been working for a long time. They had turned them off on purpose." "Why?" Lisa asked, her gaze cold and piercing. "Why cover up what really happened?" "Because this wasn't the first time," Myers whispered. "They knew that if someone started digging, they'd find other deaths. And then the prison would get shut down, and we'd all lose our jobs. Brooks couldn't let that happen." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process what he had just heard. It was worse than he had imagined. This wasn't just negligence, it was an entire system of abuse, and Darrell Rainey was merely the latest victim in a long chain. "You understand Brooks is going to try to take you down now, right?" Marcus asked quietly. "You're a threat to him. You're the only one who can expose him." Myers nodded, fear filling his eyes. "I know," he whispered. "But I don't have a choice. I can't live with this anymore." Marcus and Lisa left the interrogation room with heavy hearts. Now they had evidence, and the case needed to go to court. But they both knew this wasn't the end. The system was resisting, and those at the top wouldn't give up easily. Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the notes he had taken that day. Myers' confession had given the investigation a powerful push forward, but it also pushed everyone involved in the case to a point of no return. Now Brooks knew they were onto him, and they needed to act fast before the prison warden took steps to destroy evidence or silence witnesses. Lisa entered the office, holding a folder with the latest documents. She looked concerned. "Marcus, I just spoke with the prosecutor. He wants to arrest Brooks as soon as possible before he has a chance to destroy evidence or flee. We have all the testimony we need from Myers, but what?" Marcus interrupted, looking up. "But the prosecutor isn't sure it's enough. He thinks Brooks might make bail and start eliminating witnesses. We need stronger evidence to lock this case in court." Marcus frowned. Myers' confession was strong, but without physical evidence, the case was still risky. The court might dismiss verbal testimony, especially if Brooks hired top lawyers. "Damn." Marcus rubbed his face with his hands. "We can't just let him walk free. If we arrest him and then lose him, all our efforts will be wasted. We need something more concrete," Lisa confirmed. "Recordings, photos, something that directly ties Brooks to what happened." Marcus thought for a moment, then it hit him. "The guard communications records," he said, standing up from his desk. Myers mentioned there were internal conversations that could have been recorded. If we can access those records, we might find Brooks giving orders or discussing the events. Quote. Lisa nodded, understanding where Marcus was going. "But we'll need a warrant to access that data. And time is against us. Brooks might destroy everything before we get permission." "Then we're going to court right now," Marcus said firmly. "And if we have to, we'll pressure the prosecutor to secure the warrant. This is our only chance." A few hours later, they stood outside the courthouse. Prosecutor James Hall was waiting for them at the entrance. Tall, with a cold gaze, he always acted quickly and decisively. But today there was tension in his eyes. "Do you have what we need?" Marcus asked as he approached Hall. "I got the warrant to seize the prison communication records," Hall replied. "But it's not as simple as it seems. Brooks has already started making moves. He somehow found out that Myers gave a confession." "Damn it," Lisa cursed. "How close is he to covering everything up?" "I don't know yet," Hall said. "But we need to move faster. Brooks is probably already starting to destroy records as soon as he realizes evidence is being collected against him. If we have a chance, it's now." Marcus knew they had little time. They all headed to the prison, where a team of technicians with server access was already waiting. When they arrived at Dade Correctional Institution, the guards looked at them suspiciously. Some of them seemed to know something was happening, but none dared to confront the detectives and prosecutor armed with a warrant. Thomas Brooks met them at the entrance. His face was calm, but there was hidden irritation in his eyes. He knew they had come for him. "What's going on?" he asked with a forced smile. "You want to talk to my guards again?" "We're here to seize the internal communication records," Marcus replied firmly, handing over the warrant. "This is an official order. We need access to all communications from the last 6 months." Brooks's smile disappeared, and his face took on a cold, emotionless mask. "This is an invasion of privacy and a violation of the security of our institution," he said, holding back his frustration. "Do you really think you have the right to barge in here?" "We not only have the right but the obligation," Prosecutor Hall responded dryly. "And if you try to obstruct us, it will only worsen your situation." Brooks knew arguing was pointless. He silently stepped aside, allowing the technical team to access the server room. Marcus and Lisa followed them. When they reached the servers, everyone waited in tense silence. The technician connected to the system and began extracting the data. Several minutes passed in quiet anticipation until, finally, files appeared on the screen. "We've got the records," the technician said, scanning through the contents. "Conversations from the past 6 months. Yes, there are ones related to the showers. Should I play them?" Marcus nodded, and a moment later, they heard Myers' voice, reporting that Darrell Rainey had been sent to the shower to cool off, followed by Brooks's order confirming, "Leave him there until he calms down." It was exactly what they needed. Direct evidence that Brooks had given the order that led to Rainey's death. Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances. Now they had everything they needed to arrest Brooks. Thomas Brooks paced nervously around his office, feeling the invisible noose tightening around his neck. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lawyers, colleagues, and even some influential figures from the prison department were trying to understand the situation. But Brooks knew, everything was falling apart. He hadn't been able to stop Myers, and now the detectives had the recordings that directly tied him to Darrell Rainey's death. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began deleting emails, documents, everything that could incriminate him in other incidents. He knew he didn't have much time left. But just as his fingers touched the keys, there was a loud knock on the door. Brooks froze. He already knew who it was. "Mr. Brooks, open the door. This is the police." Marcus's voice boomed from behind the door, followed by another, louder, more insistent knock. Brooks squinted, mentally cursing Myers for breaking down. He quickly closed the laptop and stood up slowly. His heart pounded in his chest. Could this really be the end? He walked to the door, gathering all his composure, and opened it. Standing before him were Marcus and Lisa, with several police officers behind them. "Thomas Brooks, you are under arrest for abuse of power and negligence leading to the death of inmate Darrell Rainey," Marcus said, reading him his rights. Lisa watched, her face impassive. She knew this was a pivotal moment, but her mind was already racing ahead, thinking about what came next. The system ran deeper than just Brooks, and they knew there were likely others involved in these deaths. "You have no right," Brooks hissed, trying to maintain his calm. "I'll sue all of you. This is a mistake, and you'll regret it." "Doubt it," Marcus responded dryly, signaling the officers to handcuff Brooks. "We have everything we need for the court, your orders, Myers' testimony. You won't escape justice." The officers began to handcuff Brooks, but realizing there was no way out, he made a sudden attempt to flee. However, they quickly subdued him, and within minutes, he was on the ground, immobilized. "It's over, Thomas," Marcus said, leaning down toward him. "Your games are finished. Now, you'll answer for everything." When Brooks was escorted out of the prison building, a small group of journalists had already gathered outside, waiting. They immediately began shouting questions, but the detectives didn't respond. The officers loaded Brooks into a car and drove off. Lisa and Marcus stood at the entrance, watching the scene unfold. This was an important victory, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the case wasn't over yet. Arresting Brooks was crucial, but the entire system seemed rotten to the core. "What now?" Lisa asked, looking at Marcus. "Now, we keep going," he replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Brooks is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to dig deeper. Myers gave us a lead, but who else was involved? Other guards? Doctors? How many people knew and stayed silent? Do you think there will be more arrests?" Lisa asked thoughtfully. If we find the evidence, yes, Marcus sighed heavily. We know there have been other deaths, and Brooks couldn't have acted alone. But we need to be careful. Someone in his circle will try to cover their tracks or intimidate witnesses. We can't waste time. While the detectives were gathering evidence and preparing for more arrests, the Florida prison system was already in turmoil. Internal investigations that had started after Rainey's death had only scratched the surface. And now all eyes were on the investigation led by Marcus and Lisa. Journalists were digging deeper, and news of corruption and mistreatment of inmates spread quickly. Public opinion was divided. Some believed that Brooks and his colleagues were mere scapegoats, while others were convinced that this was only the beginning of uncovering a systematic problem within the state's prisons. Marcus was sitting at his desk, reviewing reports, when he received a call from the prosecutor's office. "Marcus, we have news," Hall said. "Myers made a deal and is ready to testify against other guards. But there's a problem. He's started receiving threats. It seems someone else in the system is trying to silence him." Marcus clenched his fists. He knew this wouldn't end easily. Those who felt threatened were willing to do anything to keep their secrets. "We'll put him under protection," Marcus said firmly. "We can't let them intimidate him again." Brooks's case was only beginning, but it was already clear that the most challenging phase of the investigation was yet to come. Marcus stood by the window of his office, staring thoughtfully at the street. In the few days since Brooks's arrest, significant progress had been made in the investigation. Prosecutor Hall had promised to file new charges based on Myers' testimony, but a new threat had emerged. Someone had decided to take a dangerous route and intimidate the key witness. Lisa, meanwhile, nervously flipped through the files collected by the other prison guards. Every detail of the case only confirmed that Darrell Rainey had not been the only victim. The walls of the correctional facility hid many dark secrets that were about to surface. "Are you sure Myers is safe?" Lisa asked, tearing her gaze away from the documents and looking at Marcus. "As much as possible," he replied, still staring out the window. "He's been moved to a special block under protection, but we both know if someone decides to take him out, they'll have the means to do it." Lisa nodded. In a system as rotten as this one, it was hard to trust anyone, even with increased security. Someone could always be on someone else's side, and it was clear that those responsible for Rainey's death weren't going down without a fight. "Have you talked to the prosecutor?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus answered. "He's raising hell, demanding urgent action. But we can't keep Myers in isolation forever. We need to move this case to the next level as quickly as possible before it's too late." Lisa sighed and glanced back down at the files. "Then we need to act fast. Interrogating the other guards is just a matter of time. But I'm not sure they'll talk like Myers did. The fear of losing their jobs or facing charges is too strong. We have to find a way to make them talk." Marcus turned to Lisa. "Brooks may keep quiet, but I'm sure someone else knows more. We just need to find the right approach." Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Brooks's questioning had begun. His lawyers were doing everything they could to stall the process, deflecting questions or demanding breaks. But the pressure was mounting. Prosecutor Hall had recordings of conversations that left no doubt about Brooks's guilt. When Brooks was brought into the courtroom, he no longer looked as confident as he had before. His face was gray, and his eyes betrayed exhaustion. During the first hours of questioning, he denied his guilt, claiming that he was just doing his job and that he never gave any orders that could harm anyone. But when the prosecutor played the recordings of Brooks's orders, the silence in the courtroom was oppressive. Everyone present wore the same expression, the realization that they were witnessing an exposure. Brooks knew his situation was getting worse by the minute. "These recordings prove that you knew inmate Rainey was in the shower for several hours under scalding water, despite his condition," Hall said loudly. "You ordered him to be left there until he calmed down. And now you want to claim that this was a mistake? It wasn't my direct responsibility." Brooks tried to defend himself. "I was in charge of the prison, but I wasn't monitoring every inmate personally. Myers was supposed to watch over the showers." "Myers was following your orders," Hall interrupted. "And we have evidence of that. So don't try to shift the blame onto your subordinates." At that moment, it became clear, the case was moving toward its conclusion. But for Marcus and Lisa, this was just one step. Now, they needed to focus on the other participants in this system. Late that evening, back at the precinct, Lisa was reviewing reports on recent deaths in the prison. Some of them looked suspiciously similar to Rainey's case. She couldn't shake the feeling that such incidents had been happening for years. "Look at this," she said to Marcus as he approached her desk. "Here's a list of inmate deaths over the last 3 years. We have at least 5 cases where inmates died under suspicious circumstances." Marcus squinted at the reports. "And none of these cases were properly investigated?" He knew the answer but asked anyway. "No, they were all closed as accidents," Lisa replied. "But we know there's something behind them." Then we need to dig deeper, Marcus decided. "We need to reach out to the families of the deceased, find those who are willing to talk. Brooks is just the beginning. We need to uncover the whole chain before someone else dies." Lisa nodded. They both understood they were not only fighting specific people but also the system itself, which had been hiding its mistakes and brutality for decades. Marcus sat in a dark corner of the cafe, studying a notebook filled with notes about other inmates who had died under suspicious circumstances. Lisa's list had stunned him: 5 dead over the past 3 years, all within the same correctional facility. He felt they were close to uncovering the truth, but he also knew that every step forward could be more dangerous than the last. The threat was real. A call from Lisa pulled him out of his thoughts. She rarely called at this hour, and it could only mean one thing: something had gone wrong. "Marcus, we need to meet. Urgently." Lisa's voice was tense. "Myers, he's been attacked." Marcus froze. "Where is he now?" he asked, immediately realizing this was no random act. Someone within the system clearly didn't want Myers to talk. "He's in the hospital. He's stable, but still unconscious," Lisa said, her voice calm but with a trace of desperation. "Someone got into his cell, despite the increased security. This wasn't an accident." "I'm on my way," Marcus replied shortly, bolting for the door and leaving money on the table. The atmosphere at the hospital was tense. When Marcus entered the ward, Lisa was already there, speaking to a nurse. Her face showed worry, though she tried to remain composed. "How is he?" Marcus asked immediately. "The doctors say he'll survive, but he's still unconscious," Lisa replied, nodding toward Myers' room. "They say he was beaten, but the attacker was careful not to kill him." "It's a warning," Marcus said grimly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Someone wants him to stay silent but not dead. That means they still have a plan." Lisa nodded. Her gaze lingered on the door to Myers' room. "We're in danger, Marcus. They know we're getting close. If we can't take this to the next level, they'll just take us out, one by one." "We're not stopping," Marcus said confidently. "We need to ramp up protection for Myers. If he talks, it could give us the final piece of the puzzle." Lisa looked at him with doubt. "Do you really think he'll talk after being attacked? He might be too scared." "We don't have a choice," Marcus replied. "Myers is the key to unraveling the whole system. If we can get him to testify, everything will fall into place." After a long day at the hospital, Marcus and Lisa returned to the precinct to continue the investigation. They knew time was running out. Whoever was behind the attack on Myers wasn't going to stop. Marcus opened the file on the other inmates who had died in the prison and resumed studying each case. "Look at this," he called Lisa over to his desk. "This case, Jacob Wilson, died in 2011. He was found hanged in his cell. Official cause, suicide, but the report mentions bruises on his arms and signs of strangulation." Lisa frowned. "That doesn't sound like suicide." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "It could have been murder, staged to look like suicide. And check this one out. Daniel Hopkins died of a heart attack. However, his medical records show no history of heart disease. And again, bruises on the body. It's a clear pattern," Lisa muttered. They were getting rid of anyone who didn't fit into their plans. Maybe these were people trying to speak out? Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The pieces were starting to fit together in his mind. All these deaths, they're part of the system. The prison isn't just a place for inmates. It's a closed structure with its own rules. And if someone steps out of line, they're eliminated. Lisa nodded silently. The question was, how could they prove it? A few hours later, a new message arrived at the precinct. As Lisa read it, her face went pale. "Marcus, look," she said, handing him the printout. It was an official notice that the investigation into Darrell Rainey's death was being suspended due to a lack of evidence. The prosecution had decided that Myers' testimony and the existing evidence weren't enough to pursue the case further. Marcus clenched the printout in his hands, feeling the rage boil inside him. This was clearly an attempt to cover up the truth. "They've decided to bury it," he said grimly. "We got too close. And now they're trying to stop us." Lisa nodded, her face serious. "What are we going to do?" Marcus looked up at her. "We're not backing down. If they think they can cover this up, we'll bring everything to light. We'll find other evidence. Myers isn't the only one who can help us." They both knew they were now up against a system that wasn't afraid to use any means necessary to protect its secrets. But Marcus and Lisa were ready to go all the way, to uncover the truth, and to expose what was hidden behind the closed doors of the correctional facility. The morning at the precinct started with bad news. Prosecutor Hall, one of the few who had actively supported the investigation, suddenly withdrew his statements and halted further actions on the case. For Marcus and Lisa, this was a heavy blow. Someone who had once been their ally had now disappeared into the shadows. Marcus rushed into Lisa's office, holding a printout of Hall's statement. "You've seen this, right?" Prosecutor Hall dropped the charges. "He just gave up." His voice was filled with a mix of anger and despair. Lisa nodded, opening her laptop to check the latest updates. They both understood that Hall might have been pressured, just like others involved in the investigation. The system was still playing its game, and its grip was tightening. "We're at a dead end," Lisa said quietly. "If Hall's out, the case is probably going to close for good." Marcus threw the printout on the table and began pacing the room. "We can't just give up. We've come too far. This is their final move. They want to break us." Lisa was silent for a few moments, watching Marcus. "We could try going to the feds," she finally suggested. "If we go beyond state lines, maybe we can get outside help." Marcus stopped and looked at her. "The FBI? You think they'd take our case? We've got evidence that might interest them. Crimes committed within the prison walls could be part of something much bigger. If we can prove this is a systemic conspiracy, they'll intervene." Marcus considered her words. Reaching out to the feds was risky. But it might be their only chance to keep the investigation alive. "All right," he finally said. "Let's start gathering everything we've got. We need to prepare a package of evidence that will convince the FBI." That evening, Marcus and Lisa sat in her office, surrounded by documents and photographs. They compiled all the evidence they had: photos of inmates' bodies, medical reports, recorded conversations, and testimony from Myers and other prison staff. "We need to organize all this," Lisa said, sorting the documents into folders. "It has to look like a solid case." Marcus nodded, taking one of the folders. "We should make a few copies as well. If something happens to the original, we'll have backups." Both of them understood that the situation was becoming more dangerous. The closer they got to the truth, the more likely it was that someone would try to stop them. "You know, if they find out we're going to the FBI, they'll try to take us out," Marcus said, looking at Lisa. "I know that," she replied calmly. "But that doesn't mean we stop." After several hours, when all the evidence was prepared, Marcus suggested taking a break. They sat in a small cafe near the precinct, talking about their next steps. "We need to move fast," Marcus said, sipping his coffee. "If we wait, they might beat us to it." Lisa nodded in agreement. "We'll send the materials tomorrow." "But there's one more thing," she said after a pause. "We need to talk to the families of the other inmates. If we can get more witnesses, it'll strengthen our case." Marcus knew this would be a tough step. Many of the inmates' families probably wouldn't want to cooperate, either out of fear of retaliation or because they didn't believe in the success of the investigation. "We can try," he said, looking out the window. "But it won't be easy." They agreed to start the next day, wasting no time. Time was their enemy. The next morning, Lisa and Marcus drove to the suburbs of Miami to meet with the first family, Jacob Wilson's wife. The inmate who had been found hanged in his cell. Mary Wilson had been reluctant to meet at first, but after some persuasion, she agreed. When they entered the house, Mary looked exhausted. Her eyes were tired, and it was clear that her husband's death had left a deep scar on her. "I don't know how I can help," she said as soon as Marcus and Lisa began asking questions. "For years, they've been telling me it was suicide. What can I do against that?" Marcus sat on the couch across from her. "We don't believe it was suicide, Mary," he said softly. "We suspect your husband was murdered." And we want to prove it. Mary struggled to hold back tears as she listened. She hadn't spoken to anyone about this in a long time. But now, with people in front of her who truly believed her words, she felt she couldn't stay silent. Jacob was always a fighter, she began, wiping her eyes. He wasn't the kind of person who would take his own life. Even after he was arrested, he told me he'd fight to the end. And then, they just said he hanged himself. Marcus and Lisa listened intently. They knew every detail could be important. Did anything strange happen before his death? Did he say anything unusual to you? Mary thought for a moment, staring out the window. He became nervous. A few weeks before it all happened, he told me he didn't trust some of the guards. And one day, he mentioned he'd found out something important. Something about the prison administration. Lisa tensed. Do you know what he found out? No, he didn't have time to tell me, Mary replied. He said he'd explain everything when we spoke again, but that never happened. Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances. This could be the very information that had cost Jacob Wilson his life. Thank you, Mary, Marcus said, standing up. We'll do our best to find out what really happened to your husband. If we can prove it, everyone involved will be held accountable. As they left the Wilsons' house, Lisa turned to Marcus. It seems Jacob was close to uncovering something. That might be why he was killed. Marcus nodded. Now we have another lead. We need to find out what exactly he discovered and how it connects to the other victims. They returned to the precinct, feeling like they were beginning to piece together the connections between all these cases. The morning at the precinct began with tension. After the conversation with Mary Wilson, Marcus and Lisa realized they faced a difficult task. Finding evidence to support her claims. They both knew that such leads were rarely coincidental, and if Jacob really had uncovered something, it could shed light on a larger picture. Jacob discovered something, and it cost him his life, Marcus said, reviewing the documents about Wilson's death. The question is, what was it, and why did they decide to get rid of him? Lisa sat across from him, sorting through papers. Maybe he witnessed something he wasn't supposed to, she suggested. Or he learned about some shady dealings within the prison administration. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Did you see the prison inspection reports from the last few years? There's nothing serious. Everything looks too clean. That's just on paper, Lisa sighed. In reality, we know corruption thrives in places like this. We need to find those who worked with Jacob and Rainey and make them talk. Marcus and Lisa decided to focus on those who had direct contact with Jacob before his death. They compiled a list of guards and prison workers to interrogate. We need someone willing to risk telling the truth, Marcus said, going through the names. Lisa nodded. Let's start with the shift supervisor from the night Jacob died. If anyone knows what really happened, it's him. The interrogation of the shift supervisor, Joe Henderson, yielded no results. He stubbornly repeated the same story. Jacob Wilson had been depressed, he had behavioral problems, and his death was a suicide. Lisa knew he was hiding something but couldn't find a way to make him talk. Marcus sat next to her, observing Henderson, noticing the slightest changes in his demeanor. You do realize we'll find out the truth eventually? Marcus said calmly, looking Henderson straight in the eyes. When that happens, those involved will be punished. If you think you can escape responsibility, you're wrong. Henderson averted his gaze, pursing his lips but saying nothing. Marcus could see that he was scared but holding firm. Are you one of them, Henderson? Marcus asked quietly. Or are you just staying silent out of fear? The man shot him a sharp glance. You won't prove anything, he said irritably. You don't have any evidence. It was a suicide, and no one can prove otherwise. Lisa decided to change tactics. Listen, Henderson, she said more gently. We know you're not the mastermind here. But if you help us, we can help you. Think about it. The people who orchestrated this won't protect you when the truth comes out. Henderson hesitated. It was clear he was on the verge, but not yet ready to give in. I don't know anything that could help you, he muttered, looking down. All right, Marcus said dryly, standing up. But remember, when we come back, you won't get another chance for a deal. They left the interrogation room, knowing that Henderson likely knew something but wasn't ready to talk yet. Lisa sat at her desk, reviewing the surveillance footage. She watched the night of Wilson's death over and over, hoping to spot something unusual. Look at this, she said, calling Marcus over. This is the hallway camera. Do you see who entered his cell shortly before his death? Marcus squinted. The video showed 2 guards entering Wilson's cell just minutes before his supposed suicide. We've just found them, Marcus said with grim certainty. Now we have those directly tied to his death. The next morning, Lisa and Marcus headed to the prison to question the guards caught on the footage. These were John Stanton and Carl Maddox, 2 seasoned correctional officers who had worked there for years. Both had been on duty the night Jacob Wilson died and, as it turned out, could be involved in his death. The guards were brought in separately for questioning. Marcus began with John Stanton, a middle-aged man with a cautious expression. He was clearly on guard. You were in Wilson's cell the night he died, Marcus began without preamble. What were you doing there? Checking on the inmate, Stanton replied indifferently. Standard procedure. Standard procedure? Entering the cell with 2 guards and staying there for several minutes? Marcus questioned. That doesn't look like a routine check. Stanton shrugged, but it was clear he was tense. We were just doing our job. Marcus decided not to press right away. He paused and changed the topic slightly. You've been working in the prison for a long time, Stanton? Yeah, over 10 years, the guard replied, not understanding where Marcus was heading. And in all that time, you must have seen a lot of strange things? Like unusual deaths, such as the one that happened to Wilson? A lot of things happen in prison. Stanton muttered. It's a place where people die. Some from illness, others by their own hand. Marcus looked at him with narrowed eyes. But not all deaths here are natural, are they? You know what I'm talking about. Stanton looked away. He knew Marcus was leading up to something bigger. I don't know anything like that, he said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Marcus decided to make one final move. We already know what happened to Wilson, he said, leaning forward slightly. You're not the first person involved. But you can be the first to talk and get out of this with minimal losses. Stanton fell silent. Marcus could see his face contort with inner conflict. He realized the truth would soon come out, and his chances of escaping unscathed were slim. I didn't kill him, Stanton finally said quietly. We were just following orders. Marcus straightened up. Whose orders? He asked. I can't say, Stanton replied, standing up. It's above me. Marcus watched him as a man who realized he had crossed the line beyond which there was no return. Stanton was just a small part of a larger scheme, and now they knew the guards were mere pawns carrying out someone else's will. When Stanton left the room, Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Lisa. We need to find out who gave the orders, he said. We're close, but we're not there yet. Now their main task was to uncover who was behind the orders that led to Jacob Wilson's death, and possibly Darrell Rainey's as well. Marcus and Lisa began to realize that things ran much deeper than they had anticipated. Guards like Stanton and Maddox were following orders, but the source of those orders was higher up. The question was who exactly was giving the directives and why. The prison seemed like a place where the rules were set far beyond its walls. The next day, Marcus received an unexpected message from an anonymous source who proposed a meeting. It could be dangerous, but they knew they couldn't waste any more time. Lisa insisted on accompanying him. The meeting spot was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. A light drizzle was falling, adding to the ominous atmosphere. Inside, a hooded figure awaited them, face hidden. I know what you're looking for, the figure began as Marcus and Lisa approached. His voice was calm but carried tension. You don't have much time. If you want to find out what really happened to Wilson and Rainey, you need to understand that it's more than just random deaths in the prison. Who are you? Marcus asked. And how do you know this? The man slowly lowered his hood, revealing Edward Harper, the former deputy warden who had been fired on suspicion of misconduct. Marcus recognized him immediately. Harper had been behind many of the questionable decisions at the facility. I was part of the system, Harper said, locking eyes with Marcus. But even I didn't know everything. When Rainey died, I started digging deeper and realized it wasn't just an accident. There are people using the prison as a cover for darker dealings. Who's giving the orders? Lisa demanded sharply. We know the guards didn't act on their own. Harper hesitated, then replied, Warden Williams. But he's getting orders from even more powerful people. This isn't just about the prison, it involves local politicians. The corruption runs deeper than you think. Marcus and Lisa stood frozen. It was hard to comprehend the scale of what they were up against. The entire system, from the prison administration to the city's leadership, was implicated in the conspiracy. "Why are you helping us?" Marcus asked. Harper sighed. "I played by their rules for too long. I watched people die who could have been saved. I knew that if I didn't come forward, more deaths would follow. This might be my last chance to do something right. Do we have enough evidence to go after Williams?" Lisa asked. "Not quite," Harper admitted. "But I can give you documents that show his connections to the politicians. With them, you'll be able to take him down." He handed Marcus a folder filled with documents, then quickly left the warehouse, leaving them alone with new evidence. "Now we know who's behind this," Marcus said, flipping through the pages. "But can we stop them?" Lisa nodded, looking at him with firm resolve. "We have to. We don't have a choice." The next day, they headed to the district attorney's office to hand over the documents. Prosecutor John McKinney was already aware of Marcus and Lisa's investigation, but even he was stunned when he saw the names mentioned in the documents. "You realize this will blow the whole system wide open?" McKinney asked as he scanned the papers. "If these documents are legitimate, we're talking about corruption reaching the very top." Marcus nodded. "That's why we need to act fast. We can't let them cover this up." "I'll start an official investigation," McKinney said, "but it won't be easy. We're going to face serious resistance." "We're ready," Marcus replied firmly. A few days later, a massive operation began. The prosecutor's office issued arrest warrants for key figures, including Warden Williams and several high-ranking officials named in Harper's documents. But a sense of danger lingered. Those behind the conspiracy weren't going to surrender without a fight. Marcus and Lisa were at the station when the phone rang. "Marcus, it's Harper," came the anxious voice on the other end. "They know you handed over the documents. You need to be careful. They're going to take you out." "I'm not afraid of them," Marcus replied. "If they want a war, they'll get one." "This isn't a joke," Harper said sharply. "I've got more information. I'll meet you tonight at the same place." The call abruptly ended. Lisa looked at Marcus with concern. "It's a trap. They want us to show up." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but if Harper's right, this might be our last chance to get the key evidence." They headed to the abandoned warehouse, but this time, they were ready for anything. Inside, it was empty. Marcus stepped into a dark corridor, holding his gun at the ready. "He's here somewhere," Lisa whispered, shining her flashlight ahead. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Marcus froze and aimed his weapon toward the noise. Harper appeared before them, panic in his eyes. "They're here," he gasped, barely reaching them. "Get out." At that moment, gunfire erupted. Marcus and Lisa hit the ground, taking cover behind some crates. A shootout ensued in the corridor. Harper was wounded, but Marcus managed to grab him and pull him to safety. "Who are they?" Marcus shouted, trying to spot the attackers. "Williams's men," Harper groaned. "They want to eliminate anyone who knows the truth." Realizing they had little time, Marcus and Lisa decided to make a run for it. They shielded Harper and, dodging bullets, made their way outside. Once they reached a safe spot, Lisa called for backup. Within hours, Williams was arrested along with several officials implicated in the conspiracy. The documents Marcus and Lisa handed over sparked a large-scale investigation and a cleansing of the prison system. Harper survived, but he knew his life would never be the same. He entered the witness protection program, aware that he had revealed too many secrets. When it was all over, Marcus and Lisa stood outside the prosecutor's office, watching as police cars drove away. "We did it," Marcus said, feeling a sense of relief. "Yes," Lisa agreed, "but this is only the beginning. Everything's going to change now." The truth had been exposed, but the traces of the conspiracy ran deep. Thanks to Marcus and Lisa's efforts, the system had a chance to be cleansed.